This is Amber Brittain-Hale, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
This is going to be fun. Thanks. First off, everybody, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Boxing Day, etc. Same to you, Amber. Thanks for coming on the show.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, we should do this more often. I keep busy, but then I realize, oh shit, I really enjoyed talking to Amber. Every time I talk to her, I got to have her back on the show more. The thing I think about when it comes to foreign policy and geopolitics, etc., is we get these secretaries of state, and we kind of just look. I'm not a big Anthony Blinken fan. I sort of watched his career. I was deployed, experiencing the foreign policy column that he was within, and I frankly wasn't impressed, right? And so then we get Marco Rubio, who everybody was just lauding when he came up, and I'm like, I don't know, like I'm not a partisan person at all, so like, can he do a good job? Also, by the way, they get to do the job that they want to do because they are the person picked. But what are the hallmarks of a good Secretary of State?
Well, I'm with you. I have to say, in total agreement. Number one on Anthony Blinken. Could be an incredible man, could have great interpersonal relationships. His efficacy on the global stage was a zero, an absolute zero. And he was part of an administration overall that I had an incredible time, or a difficult time, supporting or finding any agreement with. So he's going to go down in the annals of just being ineffectual and sad. So here comes Marco Rubio. And again, his area of operations was domestic. He was a senator from Florida. And so he wasn't proven on the world stage. And yet he comes out swinging with a great deal of clarity. And he is not imprecise when he explains, this is the goal and purpose of the United States government. This is how we spend our money. Does it make us stronger? Does it do this? Does it do that? And even rebranding USAID to all come from the State Department with like this branding mission. This is United States government aid, in which is going to build your self-sufficiency, your capacity. This isn't just money that's going to keep funneling to you. So he has this incredible amount of clarity. And I want to say that is the strength, the hallmark of a strong Secretary of State who isn't confused by the mission, purpose, and governance that lays behind him and what his focus should be, he or she. The analytical clarity as to what am I to do in this office, and the purpose and the connection. And I think the confusion in that is looking at ministers of foreign affairs across Europe and other countries who are quite confused, who don't have the analytical clarity. Are we here to save other populations? Are we to be concerned in their civil strife? What about propping up other governments? How are we meddling? Or maybe everybody should immigrate here. We need to have concern for everyone and everything. And while those aren't unworthy, a state only has so much capacity. And I think a very strong Secretary of State, to put a fine point on this, is very clear about the national capacity and mission, governance, and purpose.
Yeah. Well said. So many people were talking about Marco Rubio when he first started, about like how he's built for this, he's set up for this. I wasn't aware of that, and I'm not a Washington wonk kind of person at all. So, but I'll believe it when I see it. And then I guess the other thing I would say, and this is, we're picking on Anthony Blinken, I don't know that he'll be seen as somebody who was ineffective and not very good at his job throughout his career. I think he'll continue to make a lot of money and continue to, if Pete will say, continue to get things wrong, and he'll write papers and get paid and set up foundations and all those things. And I think he'll continue to be an overall menace to our foreign policy. This is not a partisan statement. This is just, I didn't see his success warranting the amount of any kind of credibility. But and maybe you're more positive about this. Maybe you're like, hey, no, he'll be forgotten and washed aside. I've not seen that. I think the think tank state is also like always looking for people like him to be a name that they bank off of and collect off of.
That could be true. And look, there's lots of people who are just weak or limp in their job. and that doesn't make them wicked, evil, or have nefarious purpose. And I'm not really sure where Blinken falls in because he was
Mm.
part of an apparatus that I don't agree with and a
Hmm.
lot of those policy decisions. And sending him to Kiev to play his guitar, rocking in the free world while kids are being, shelled in their school.
Yeah.
I don't see it. I don't see that as having resonance and efficacy in foreign policy. That
Right.
doesn't mean he's a bad man. And
Sure.
sure, he has something to contribute. And, have you ever walked away from a company and thought, I don't agree with anything that you're doing here? Maybe he thinks that every single day. And I'm going to give
Yeah.
him credit as being just a human being having this mortal experience and being fallible and part of an organization like the rest of us are when we don't agree with how it's
Yeah.
how it's going. Because again, I don't think he's failed or evil, whereas there's a whole list of characters on the world stage that are actually those things, and I don't feel that about him. So,
Yeah.
did he have strengths? Certainly does. I think he's an introspective person and considerate of the human condition.
Hmm.
But is he going down as a great Secretary of State? I don't know. I don't think that he's transformative in the way that Rubio is, good, bad, or
Mm.
indifferent. I don't think he's transformative, and I think that's some of the metrics that people are gonna track. Did this change the
Yeah.
trajectory of a thing? And Rubio is much more transformative.
Right. I guess we should also mention Tillerson and Pompeo because they also are recent secretaries of state. How do they fall in? These are guys who have legitimate resumes to potentially have done good things. Doesn't, in my mind, seem to have worked out for them, but maybe I'm wrong.
Tillerson was interesting. I had high hopes that somebody with such a business pedigree, running large organizations and
Yes.
connection globally, would have some of this same transformational leadership skill set, some of those traits, behaviors, and impacts. And I don't know if it's the apparatus of swampy DC leveraged against him, that he was an
Hmm.
outsider and he wasn't the preferred pick. It could be that the system was set up against him. I know that he faced extreme blowback when he was trying to reorganize the State Department, and he's possibly the Doge before the Doge, and it
Hmm.
just was unpopular and these pet projects. So that being said, I'm not certain that he is given a fair evaluation through the lens of history because of the highly fraught and context dependent conditions of the first Trump administration. It is really difficult to say, looking at all the turnover in Trump one and
Hmm.
interests allied against Trump one. So anyone that Donald J. Trump brought into that first administration had just had headwinds from the get go, and I think to get a fair evaluation is challenging. So it is always interesting to me to see people who are so successful in arenas then step into a different role
Hmm.
and fail, or at least all appearances fail spectacularly. It's interesting. Is it the system or is it them? And I think this is a systematic problem rather than exclusively Tillerson.
Yeah. That's
Pompeo,
hopeful. Yeah. Go. Sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
but Pompeo, I'm agnostic about him and his role and what he did. I think he's chased by conspiracy theories and what his involvement is here, there, and otherwise trying to undermine a Trump one administration. So it's hard to evaluate his actual achievements. If he was working against the boss, I'm going to be clear and say that doesn't make me politically partisan. It
Right.
just is to say, I'm not sure I can evaluate without the taint of something more self promoting, sticking
Hmm.
to Pompeo. Whereas the Blinken Rubio considerations, I feel like they stand out on their own as independent actors, not for or against the administrations that they work for, as like true participants in the administrations that they work for.
Your comments on Tillerson were helpful. I too was hopeful that a person with his business pedigree would have been more successful. But yeah, there's a lot of influences to manage. Like I think if someone, and this will never happen, but if someone said, Pete, you're going to be Secretary of State, I'd be like, why the fuck would you do that? What, um, but you're asked, and so you're compelled to say yes, Mr. President, right? Like that's what you do. Who turns that job down? At least not publicly. So, all the things are arrayed against you. Your own infamiliarity with the system, all these things are aligned against you. And I'm always thinking about, when does the politics stop and the policy start? Because those things, and they overlap. And if you're in an environment where the political tumult picks you and you just get spun around in the drum for a while, it's hard to get anything done if you don't have if there's headwinds and you're being tossed around. So there is always that. So very, very tough job. And yeah, the politics, if you're considered a lever, for another party to do something, you're going to be that lever until otherwise notified. I mean, that's just how the system works.
It's true. What are you to do if you're putting out fires every single day? How do you advance policy? How do you advance a vision? And then you're given something operationally constraining. Here's your budget. Yet
Right.
you're over. You're over in people, you're over in expenditure, you're over in buildings and security, and you need to make some changes, Tillerson. So let's go for it. And then what? He's dismantling democracy. And the
Yeah.
State Department, as we know, is in shambles. And, of course, all these people are going to die. And we should have been paying more attention. All of the
Yeah.
blowback against Tillerson are the same talking points that are trotted out against the dismantling of USAID. People are starving all over the place. And even though the Congolese rape all their own people, the United States is meant to pay for HIV prevention. And now everybody's infected with AIDS across Africa because we aren't, as taxpayers, subsidizing all of these things. And I don't want to be grotesque about it. I care about
Mhm.
human beings, but I also care very much that NGOs aren't taking American taxpayer money, and that money goes to the things that it's supposed to go to appropriately. So any reform that leads to this kind of blowback messaging, that you're letting people die, starve, babies, women,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
becomes a problem to manage separate from the substantive issues that you're already tasked with managing. And again, human beings have 24 hours a day. That's it.
Yeah. One of the things I learned from being on the ground and watching the State Department work was, one, they would enfeeble people. So these poor Iraqis, if we don't teach them how to navigate the Microsoft Office suite, whatever will they do? And you're laughing because
No, no.
everybody listen, this really happened all the time.
Mhm.
Oh, well, he's got a certificate, 8x11 white piece of paper with laser printer. Here you go. Like that fucking means anything. And by the way, I would talk because I do my job. I go talk to those dudes, and they're like, "Yeah, we've had Microsoft here for like 25 years, like you guys have." So, so
Mhm.
there's that, and then things that brief well. People are gonna die. More cancer is gonna happen. Everybody's gonna get AIDS. We're terrified of that, and so no one ever shows you the dead people. They just say that all these people are dying
Mhm.
everywhere, and USAID always briefed well, but they if I saw them in the battlefield, I knew they were net destabilizers because they weren't good at delivering results. So I had no problem with them taking a deep look at USA and AID and cutting things back because I didn't see the performance there. They'll give you excuses. It's too hard. It was too complicated. That environment was non-permissive. Great. Don't go. Don't spend the money. So says Pete.
Well, you're right. So let's look at the Gaza Pier as one level of expenditure, and that's not USAID. That was just a adventures abroad sort of experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Very expensive, costly in terms of treasure, lost American lives for a purely performative construction project that had no viability and also was designed to pretend to be bringing aid in when really the aid disruption is well documented across Israel and Gaza, that it was Hamas hijacking aid and has storerooms full of aid, and we didn't need to send American soldiers to die on this pier, this
Hmm.
pop-up pontoon situation, and it's just squandering, especially of lives, and that's a real challenge for me to wrap my head around when, again, what briefs well, what sort of shibboleths and words can be trotted out to get a human reaction that make you want to send in your money, sponsor this thing now. Those briefs are dangerous, but they are designed to separate you as an individual or the American taxpayer from their money, because of course there's worthy things. Saving human lives is worthy, but where's the focus? And your original question, what makes a great Secretary of State? I think
Yeah.
it's back to this analytical clarity. If the United States is strong and sovereign and is very clear in its mission and its role, and then aid is used to increase foreign capacity in their own states, not the Microsoft Office and these, like, I think we've talked about this before, cotton socks or
Oh
some
my God.
such, not cotton socks. Like, these are money wasting endeavors that do
Yeah.
nothing to bolster our US strength, sovereignty, and or any other consideration. So I'm all for a reevaluation, but yes, if they asked Pete Turner to be Secretary of State, you would process a day or two and then have an answer, as would I. Like, we all have our ideas, but then you get into the machinery, the apparatus, and
Yeah.
being a leader. I have to say, I have a student in one of my organizational leadership classes who said, like, I want to be a leader, but I only want to lead people who want to be led.
Hmm.
And therein is
Yeah.
the therein is the human dilemma. You can be a leader of people who want to be led.
Yeah. I forget which UN secretary it was, recent one. He said, I tried to lead by example or something like that, but nobody followed. and, and that sort of, I think it was maybe the Korean guy. I forget which one it was,
Mhm.
but that just always stuck with me because you can instantly point at him and say, oh, bad leader, but also the organization. If it's not going to be compelled, then what are you leading? And so then it's the organization. And I think that's a great illustration of what we struggle with when we try to take on these impossible problems with very little direct impact on the local populace. I will tell you right now, you go to most countries in the world, and if we fly a rainbow flag, that doesn't mean anything other than maybe possibly negative things for us. This is not any kind of treatise against anybody's sexuality, but there's a cost to doing things. And when you put a flag
Mhm.
up, the people are like, "What are you guys doing?" And they don't even respect their flag. Oh my gosh! Like you. So when I say USAID and Department of State are net destabilizers, it's stuff like this where they just purposely like cut themselves on the arm, and they're like, "Okay, now that we're bleeding everywhere, all this stuff, and losing all these fights, now we're going to go make a difference in a good area, and there are not going to be enough people coming along because they've created instability."
You're wholly correct. There are many countries at the dismantling of USAID that rejoiced at the
Yeah.
prospect, that said, this has always been a negative. It's been dilutive to civil society. It's been damaging to just our processes and social cohesion.
Mhm.
Croatia is one of those that's on record. I think Guatemala's had some things to say across many countries that USAID was none of the things it purported to be. And your word, net destabilizer, is completely correct. And they are overjoyed at the thought that aid will actually be aid. Food and self-sufficiency is a goal, that it's a leg up, it is institutional reinforcement or advancement, and it's not a pride flag, it's not sort of these post-liberal values being imposed, or can you have ESG in your thing? And they're like, we don't even have ovens,
Yeah.
so
Right.
okay, like these sort of highly even post-liberal values being imposed on cultures across the globe through just a very big purse. was problematic, and they've said so.
Yeah, they being all the other countries. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a real problem. The other thing is we tend to lose sight of how long and how hard we've fought to get to where we're at, assuming that we're in the right spot. But the women's right to vote, all these other things, intermingling of tribes or whatever it's in religions, we've struggled with this. And so just to put our level of accomplishment on another country, that's like you said, they're just trying to cook. They're cooking on wood or paper or whatever they can get their hands on, and we're like, don't forget the gays. Like, no, let's slow down for a second here, and let's get these folks a stable platform where whatever it is that they're going to do next. No, I don't need Microsoft Word. I need this grant to start this actual business. I know my environment better than you, but we don't like those things. We had maybe we talked about this before, but where I was in Baghdad province out in the hinterlands, there's a place called the Ctesiphon Arch. It's Katak al Kasra in Arabic. And this is an old, I'll say Iranian, Persian monument, palace kind of thing. And it's it should be a UNESCO heritage site. And I could not get the State Department, the guy in charge of heritage sites and antiquities, could not get him to pay attention that the Iraqis were all aligned. The religious elements, Department of Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of History, all these ministries were all like, please help lead us towards these resources. I even had a professor from an American university desperate to come out and study this area and spend her whole entire career just studying this very fertile archaeological site. And they, trying to stabilize Iraq, could not be bothered with this massive cultural magnet that would have drawn people together. And and so when I saw that, it taught me everything I needed to know about State Department. About they weren't even ready to have a conversation about this. They weren't ready to take a phone call about this. It was nothing to them. It was nothing, and it was the most powerful thing I found in all my years of combat that might have welded an area together. And they were asking about it. They were leading it. It wasn't us. It was their idea, and so we didn't care about it.
Well, I think that we get in the business of doing business, and these culturally significant artifacts, archaeological sites, or something that might be more unifying seems down the list when really it should be top of the list, and it would be
Mm,
a small
hmm.
amount of money to recognize it, to preserve it, to safeguard it, etc. And I think we can see the same types of ideas throughout Latin America. So many archives of historical significance, archaeological sites haven't been excavated, like a very small fraction, right? And this could
Yeah.
be tourism, but also this repository of human understanding. And we're not pursuing it because why? You know, it's not a priority. There's so many
Mm.
other things that are a priority. And I think we have been misaligned in how we organize ourselves around history and our understanding of that, and that informs action. I've heard Doug Collins at the VA say, like, what gets measured gets done, and no
Hmm.
one's looking at these kinds of sites. They're not looking at the cultural unification. They're looking at, like you said, how do we get a tech certificate into the hands of all these people, or how do we do this thing, or more performative type of actions instead of the cultural roots, which really are more unifying. Because if you're talking about nation building, which was the great war on terror's underlying premise,
Mm.
nation building and making everybody into Denmark, then how are you unifying said cultures, nations?
Yeah.
Like, what do you believe a nation to be, and how do you define that? But yet, you're not going to put the rallying point out there, the flag for people to unify around. I do think there's some misunderstanding of what motivates people and sentiment.
Yeah. And you said the magic words nation building. My buddy Rich and I think you'll be with us on this. We never talked in terms of state building. There isn't a state in Afghanistan. This isn't, and it's not that it can't be. We never even thought to build one. And so all of our political scientists sort of ignored Weber and all the other people that have written about this. And we went ahead on this more utopic thing. And again, forgetting that Moore's utopia is it's a satire. It's not supposed to be a guide. Uh, are we ever going to get better at this?
I don't know. So there's, you know, Afghanistan could have state and state capacity should they desire that,
Hmm.
and they don't. And looking at how money was allocated, and tear down your poppy farm and grow something else. Oh wait, opium's so much more lucrative. Like there's just so much muddiness in the process. I'm not sure who was acting in the best interest of Afghanistan and who was acting in other interests. So state capacity and state building of institutions, that's just, it didn't happen. And now I don't know when the opportunity for that to happen is going to come again. But if you look at today's news and Israel's recognition of Somaliland, that is a subset
Hmm.
of this recognized nation, Somali, completely failed state with no institutions and no vetting, who actually have governed with integrity and state capacity and have focused on that singularly since their independence. And with that recognition of, Somaliland by Israel today, and a mention of this is like consistent with the idea of Abraham Accords, I think there's something really wonderful to be had there, strategically important there on the Horn of Africa. Like, I think it can be done, but the lesson is Somaliland did it themselves. They didn't do it with ground troops or, like, again, our handbooks of how you bring good socks and software to a
Yes.
people. Like, they did it themselves. And I think the capacity has to be supported from the outside, like Israel or the
Yeah.
United States, something like that, supporting the growth and fidelity of state institutions. And I think that is a remarkable story. Just today.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It is remarkable. And when it does come from the source, it tends to be better. Our ideas are typically bad. We talked about the pride flag. And again, here, great, appropriate. Let's have the conversation. But in Somaliland, probably not. South Sudan, probably not. These places are at a different level of existence. We love to do things like this. And again, this is another one of these classic examples where someone's like, we have to show these women how to manage their menstrual cycle and bring to them tampons. And it's like, well, what have they been doing for 5,000 years? Like, they don't know, like, they haven't figured this out. Like, the dudes want to talk about it. By the way, getting access to the women directly requires a special cultural license that isn't printed on paper either. It's just a delicate thing. You don't just No one would race into Inglewood and say, "All you women line up. Let's teach you about the menstrual cycle." Like, you can't do that here. You can't do that anywhere. So, um,
Well, I
how?
think,
Yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
you bring up an interesting point, because there is a nonprofit called the Period Project, and they do work
Mhm.
on having access to menstrual care and supplies across schools so that girls don't miss any days of learning. And that's here in the United States. So
Yeah.
if we haven't figured it out ourselves, why is this a global concern of telling women how to manage themselves and spending
Mm,
money, which actually goes to an NGO salary and overhead, instead of any kind of solution? It's
right.
uh, it's just such a misappropriation of treasure, in my opinion, and the big brother white savior complex of all of these things, I think, is inconsistent with actual
Mm,
solutions.
yeah. Okay, so how do we get better at dealing with these things? Because, women's periods brief well. Oh my God, what have they done? We don't have access to tampons. Having none of the people in the room ever been anywhere near these places they're talking about, not within 50 miles of them, let alone 5,000 miles at times. So, how do we get better at seeing that? Because I'll tell you what I do. I sit there in the room, I'm there, I actually go out to these places, and I'm like, what in the fuck are they talking about? I'll go ask about women's periods. I'll maybe get a female partner to do that, but we're
Mhm.
going to be very delicate and deliberate about this and expect to make mistakes because you don't just get to walk in and start doing this stuff, right? When are we going to learn to slow down and get these things right? And I know these places, the people, the elders, they want help. They want better access to medical care. They don't want to have to drive to another country, even if it's close, to get medical care. They want to get it there, but we can't seem to manage to get that stuff right. So should we even be processing these things at this level? Should we leave it to NGOs? By the way, NGOs net destabilizers most of the time that I've seen them.
Well, I'm going to note just from some of my experience in linguistics and discourse analysis, the word tampon has never been used so much as after Tim Walz became the VP candidate, and it's tampon Tim. And like, if you do an actual linguistic inquiry and word count, that's just in the public discourse now. Tampon,
Right.
tampon, tampon. And I've just said it 3 times in a row, and I don't think I've ever had a conversation about it prior to that, because those aren't the nonprofits that I've been engaged in.
Right.
So there we
Yeah.
are. It's part of the national discourse now. But
Yeah.
as far as getting it right, I am a techno optimist, and I have seen just some incredibly successful and compelling projects that have to do with drone delivery of blood products to save maternal life throughout Rwanda and other
Right.
African countries. There's so much other tech and AI that is going to allow for better health outcomes. And I think these are provided from private industry. I think that letting capitalism sort out some of these things and innovation is the way to go without imposing a solution that isn't underwritten by fact, data, product, or solution, just an idea, like a feel good passion project. I know we need to regulate everybody's, menstrual cycle, or know about it, or be involved in it, or solve it, or something. Like I don't get it, to be honest. If it's about reducing the number of missed school days by girls across cultures, okay. But there's so many ways to solve problems with technology out in the market. Did I say without? I meant with technology across the market. I think some of these solutions are going to come to the fore once we clear out the highly lucrative grift of NGO and some of these other entities that are pass-throughs for big money.
Yeah. I want to point everybody Amber's work at her website right down below here. Just go to that link. You guys can read more about what she does. It's incredible. And I thank you for coming on and talking about this stuff. I bring up the tampon thing because it's just such a ludicrous thing. We could talk about poppy and it would be just as ludicrous, but it's shocking to think that in a society that's so close, like in Afghanistan, so close that they don't use their own first names, where women lose track of first names. They're like, well, I don't I'm called this old lady or whatever, right? That we think we can just waltz in with no specific training in the culture, the language, nothing else, and just start having these conversations. It's when you brief it that way, it's like, what? Yeah, why are we doing this? And so we've got to get better. I guess the other thing I want to ask you about is, like, you and I can have these conversations because we met outside of the overall system, right? But the practical practitioner person, the PhD person, in the normal scheme of things, we never talk about, like, here's an idea, here's what we'd have to do to implement it, right? That never happens. Why don't we ever build that part of the machine where we can get regular people talking about these problems to say, wait, you want to give these guys Microsoft Office skills? And then let's go through that process like we would if it was a serious problem, like having a broken femur. You wouldn't just say, this person's injured, inoculate them for diabetes. You do an x-ray, you'd examine this thing and try to figure out the right answer, as opposed to just guessing what the answer would be.
I think that in similar to a casino, this system has been flush with money for a long time. And so many projects got funded because money is spent on things that sound good.
Right.
And it's really hard to straw man that or steel man that, either side of it. You're like, don't you want everybody to have healthcare? Don't you want people to have deployable tech skills? Learn to code. I mean, we're telling our own industries here through layoffs and reductions, learn to code. And turns out they don't get jobs now either. Now we have to learn how to plumb and be electricians. So there's been no pushback on any kind of ideas. There hasn't been any vetting. And I would say the same challenge lies in student loans. Oh, you want to go study whatever and take on $1 gazillion of debt, and you're going to be a social worker, make 30K, but you went to USC, so you'll pay that back in 500 years. All ideas are good ideas has been the problem. That's my opinion. I can pull up some studies to show you that I'm not just sharing feelings here. There's actual data to support that ideas got funded with little vetting, money just washing over the good, the bad, and the ugly,
Yeah.
and all sorts of things should have never had a dollar, and then they end up with $1 or $2 billion spent
Mhm.
on something that it went nowhere. It went to salaries.
All right. So you mentioned research, and there's a lot of people doing a lot of great work.
Mhm.
But it seems to me, as someone who's an outsider who has dabbled in academic writing, that we love a unity of voice, and the dissent voice is not celebrated as much as it ought to be. You have a conversation, if you and one of your PhD peers have a conversation, you both will know that you can't have the whole pie. Like, no, you have to
Mhm.
give up some of this stuff.
Mhm.
But we don't act like that in our public discourse. And it does seem like we have one way of thinking about these things. Is that a problem? Is it fixable? How do we deal with some diversity of thought at the PhD level so that we can have a more rigorous conversation before we deploy ideas?
Well, I'll be really candid. I'm not that popular at academic conferences. I find myself disagreeing with many, many things, and I feel that my voice isn't appreciated because I don't concede to
Yeah,
the popular approach, and I also refuse to hate on the current administration, but I didn't hate on the Biden administration either. I point out or call balls and strikes, what I like, what I don't like. Is there sound
yeah,
policy? And if I don't like any policies, I'm happy to say that. Do I enjoy every piece of discourse that comes out of all administrations? Absolutely, I do not. Can I
right.
study it and use it to inform something I'm doing? Yes. So the sclerotic and siloed world that is academia, I find to be incredibly problematic because
Mm,
there's still power and influence, credibility coming from academics, and there are things that are studied, and you wouldn't have that data, that information otherwise. But then it gets circulated, and the credibility is amplified. This,
mm,
with all certainty, is the position that we should be having. But what isn't done is the contrasting study or an extended study to look at more variables or a contrary point of view. And I think we get really narrowed in that. I try or pride myself in not being ideological and looking at a whole range of issues and settling on what I think is the best approach and what I think is ethical, moral, appropriate, and also consistent with my positionality.
mhm, mhm.
Academia is incredibly challenging, and I'm sure you've seen all the studies that show it is a liberal world, and there's not a career path for conservative academics across most institutions. There's not a pathway for tenure or promotion across most institutions. I think we're in an era of time where this is going to be mitigated as much as it can be, but that's going to be a fraction of what is necessary for ideological competitiveness or diversity of thought.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you got- this is, I mean, this is what I sense a lot of this stuff too. And, if we're going to use scientific method, who's who's trying to replicate studies, to go out and do these things? I don't know. There's money even trying to do that. Again, because a lot of these, like we thought we were going to organize the tribes of Afghanistan in some kind of meaningful ways. And even after we were failing at it, people were still writing PhD papers. We just saw the beginning and the continuation of a war in Russia that a lot of PhDs were like, "I told you. I've been telling you for 50 years," and they were desperate for this thing to happen. And now that it has happened, no one knows how to get out of it because this stuff is so locked in. And so many people's futures were invested in this horrible outcome across. And I'm just talking about two very simple examples: organizing the tribes of Afghanistan, and then here come the Russians, PhD, doctor so and so, whatever. But we, it's almost self fulfilling.
Well, here's another study and
Oh boy.
commentary that's been kind of popular the past couple of days, especially through
Yeah.
the tech sector, is that agency is
Uh-huh.
superior to intelligence. So let's take a look at agency and actors being greater than the sum of intelligence. And I think that's the problem that we experience when we look at analyses and research on Afghanistan and Russia, or even let's take, for example, the tariffs.
Hmm.
Every single economist in the Western world was incorrect on tariffs, and it's making gazillions of dollars and so strengthening. And turns out the shelves of the store aren't empty, and we're not in some communist dystopia with one pair of shoes for sale in a town. Who
Yeah.
knew?
Who
Oh,
knew?
everybody was wrong. Why are they wrong?
Hmm.
Because they didn't re-underwrite their assumptions. They went with old methods and what they learned forever ago, and they also sprinkled in their own positionality and what they think about the current president. And they're like, failure, zero, non-starter. Again, we're going to have no Christmas and be in a 1929 style depression by 2026. And none of this is correct.
Right.
Absolutely incorrect. And I think, as I said, I think that's the same with all the other intelligence that's
Mm.
being operated across these geopolitical conflicts is old ways of thinking, not revising how states interact with one another. And one more thing about this current administration is they're not ideological like past administrations are. They're not trying to nation build. They're
Hmm.
trying to conduct business. And that's different. Do what you want, have the state values that are appropriate for you. Can we do business? Do you threaten US interests? Like there's kind of a checklist, and what goes on internally is not our concern, it would appear. And I think that is a whole demarcation point to examine of where we have been prior to now and what is the current operating conditions of this government, is to say we're not going to get into your beeswax.
Mm. Yeah, we have our own business, right? And
That's
that's the
right.
whole idea. We have our own business we want to conduct. Yeah, and it's crazy because even as you're saying that, I feel uncomfortable because you're talking in a positive way about the Trump administration, right? Because it's like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, are we really going to talk about this? But we are the biggest, wealthiest market in the world. And if you want access to it, hey, guess what? It's going to cost you something. There's could be some compliance or some tariffs, whatever you want to do. Choose your poison. Oh, and by the way, we also can produce world-class products. So we'd like you to buy our airplanes. We'd like you to buy our fill in the blank, all those things. And that's proven to be a very powerful negotiating thing. And the next time Donald Trump, the president, goes out and undermines his own success with some needless comment or whatever, it won't be the last time. So it does cause problems. But I guess that's just who he is. I don't know. It's very frustrating to have to see what appear to be good ideas, good approaches working, but then also see the chaos that's caused by the very same person who's pointing us in this direction.
I think it's true. I think there's a lot of reaction to the discourse. Again, this is more my area than anything else.
Hmm.
Discourse that brings uncertainty or discomfiture from the European class or the diplomatic class or a liberal class. There's lots of people that find themselves so uncomfortable with the discourse of the president, his rhetoric in particular, and they can't abide it, let alone analyze the underlying idea. And I think that is a problem for the beholder. He
Mm.
doesn't seem to have a problem with it. And I think after all these, years on the political stage, people should quit fainting over every Truth Social post, every truth that is shared. So it is interesting to speak in a way that's positive about the current administration.
Mm,
Again,
mhm,
I'll say it one more time. I don't believe myself to be ideological. I like to look at balls and strikes and things that I like and I don't like, and I think that are efficacious, appropriate, and necessary to a sovereign country. And I like a lot of the messaging, which is it's time to build, it's time to focus on reindustrializing the United States, it's time to bring back state capacity, have onshoring of pharmaceuticals, automobiles, all the things that are happening, energy. I agree with those as policy points.
mm,
So there is a lot of performative politics out there, a lot of performative vulgarity, and that fainting couch of Europe. Again, love Europe, love my European colleagues, and I spend a lot of time trying to encourage them to diversify the sources of information that they utilize, not react to every single thing that they find to be undiplomatic or untoward or just gauche. And I think you'll do a lot better and get a lot of business done. And if you watch the world leaders who understand Donald Trump, like Alexander Stubb of Finland, Georgia Maloney, Modi of India, they
mhm,
understand this president and they are operating from the same sort of conceit, which is my country's sovereignty, growth, stability, security are all paramount. And this is the cost of doing business. Japan is another example. She, the first
mm,
female PM, she fully understands what's at stake for Japan, and their woeful economic position has already started to go up and to the right since she took the premiership, and she is, Shinzo Abe's inheritor of this conservative movement, and she, like some of the optics of her with Trump are just they're incredible in terms of
mm.
a bilateral relationship. And I think those leaders and those states are going to get it right because they aren't for the emotion of it and they don't need to perform this outrage based on, I don't know, a Guardian article or some such. So that's what I would
Yeah.
encourage any listener is re-underwrite your own assumptions. If you
Mm,
think something was garish and inappropriate, go back to the source documents and read for yourself. Did this thing really happen? Was this really said? What do you know about tariffs, immigration, labor, fill in the blank topic? What did you know
mhm.
about it before? What did you read and how did you come to your current position? Maybe back out of it and try again and you might have a different perspective.
Yeah, no, that's great. I agree with you. When I choose to participate in the discourse, I should say the conversation, because I don't want to use discourse around you because using it in an academic sense. But I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. I don't want to hear someone else tell me what I heard or what I saw or witnessed. I want to actually hear Donald Trump or Scott Bessent or Howard Lutnick. I want to hear these guys talk. And again, that's when I choose to do it because ultimately, this is a big thing for me is I'm the biggest change agent in my own life. And if I just
Mhm.
focus on the things that I have control over, and I don't say I remain uninformed, but I only allow so much of that poison into my life because look, I've got other things to do. So I definitely echo your thing where if you watch Donald Trump speak and you watch the next 10 speeches, you will hear largely the same speech because he says the
Mhm.
same things over and over and over again. But that's him trying to communicate to us like these are the things that are happening. This is why we're doing this. And so he does say a lot of those things over and over again, and that re-underwriting of our thoughts, like what is accurate. If these economists are getting things wrong about tariffs, well then why are we listening to them? Turn the channel. And I was going to ask you, like, where do you get your analysis from day to day wise? Like, do you know what sources do you find valuable? Because I find that I'm like, I don't even know who to listen to. I just go listen to them and I go, man, we'll see, and I kind of move on.
I like primary source documents and personal dialogue a lot.
Hmm.
Listening to Scott Bessent as an example, he's a treasure trove of information, and he is taking the message direct to the public to say, You think inflation's high? Well, we've done an analysis by red state, blue state. Turns out, blue staters, you still have a really high cost of living and you can account for that. But what we've done over here with inflation and cost of goods and services, like Treasury's got a handle on this. And then we had what, the 4.3% GDP growth? Like that is astonishing, but they're taking the message directly to the public, just like all solid founders who have realized they must newsjack every story about their organization. Palmer Luckey being a prime example of that with Anduril. He is all over social media to correct incorrect narratives, assumptions, or falsehoods.
Yeah.
And this current administration is doing the same thing. And then I dig deep into their documents and their press releases, as an example, and I look at other states and other leaders, their press releases, speeches, and statements, and go to primary documents. And not everyone has the time for that. So what I'd say is X is my favorite source of information. And I think it's a highly competitive environment for data. I love community notes. And I also read through the comments on some of these primary accounts to see, is there a different perspective that can inform me? And what I like a lot now is the Grok feature being integrated. You can query Grok and ask it questions like, what supports this position? Then there's supportive documents and news articles that are provided. And then you can ask more questions like, where is Somaliland? Let's say you didn't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. If you're going for an all-in-one platform, I'd say X. If you have more time and you're a researcher who likes to read nerdy stuff like me, then start figuring out who to follow and what kind of news that you're interested in. But the mainstream media is very challenging to get fact-based reporting. And then the influencer class may call some attention to some issues, but there's also a bias there. So I'd be careful.
Yeah. Be careful for sure. Yeah. And primary source, that's hard to argue with. It's surprising that I don't see Scott Bessent on other major networks because anytime he speaks, I want to know what he said. He's a guy, him and Howard Lutnick, I pay attention to.
Me too.
And because one thing, it's just for anybody watching it, and this is just me interpreting it how I interpret it through my skills and everything. I see Howard Lutnick talking about the deals they're doing, or when Donald Trump looks at him and says, "Hey, you're having a great time doing these deals." He's beaming. You see his face. He's having a great time with these massive deals. And President Trump, and I'm not a President Trump fan, everybody. Like this is, I have a very high bar for like, you have to get over this to prove to me that you're going to be a better person, better leader. But he says to Howard, like, you're not gonna be able to go back to your regular job. You're doing such massive different deals. And he is like nodding, like, yes, you're right. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not going to get this kind of smoke from anything else. And if we're missing that, go watch Howard Lutnick talk, watch his body language when people talk about the things they're doing.
I would agree. Looking at somebody in an organization, right? When I teach organizational behavior and leadership, this is exactly what I'd say. Go through Glassdoor and see what employees say about their company. And then you go on other social media and figure it out. But when you watch Howard Lutnick, this man is completely 100% delighted to be doing the job that he is doing and bringing these huge deals to the United States and restructuring how we thought about commerce. And to be empowered as an employee, if you will, in an organization, that brings great satisfaction to people. So you can be at Widget Factory or you can be Secretary of Commerce. But when you are empowered to do these things, like there's nothing more fulfilling than that feeling. So watch him. And this is like true enjoyment in his endeavor, as well as being a worthy cause, strengthening the economic resilience and trajectory of the United States. He believes fully in that. Like if you don't believe in what you're doing, you will never have that affectation that Howard Lutnick has. He'll be like, yeah, we did it, and you're like trying to fake like it's good news. Watch the previous administration and their cabinet secretaries talk about what they're doing. There's none of that. This is like great delay. And you can look at the other cabinet secretaries as well. Brooke Rollins as an example. Lori Chavez DeRemer loves what she's doing with labor. Kelly Loeffler feels like she's empowered the SBA, has found tons of fraud and waste, and they're empowered to do their jobs and they like it.
Yeah. Yeah, and also get money towards small businesses. I know I've gotten a lot of email community because I try to work with those guys in the past, and it's very frustrating to get help. And I've got a small business, and I'm always trying to find help. I'm so glad that you saw the same things I saw in Howard Lutnick. Not so much Scott Bessick because he's more like, "Hello, I'm going to," but he's hyper smart,
He's
and I know his background.
he's ferocious. He has
Oh,
some very cutting humor, and it is astonishing to watch. He just brings out the knife skills and cuts somebody deep, and it is wild because he does it with like this impassive sort of face, and you're like,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. Especially with some of these
actual
reporters.
ninja.
Yeah, when they walk into his dojo and they try to throw a bunch of nonsense around, he's like, "That's a bunch of nonsense," and then he tells them because he is brilliant. I don't care what party he's from. I want more guys like that. I've always said, like, where are these guys? Where are these guys? Who are the leaders going to go get me a Scott Bessent for every cabinet's chair? Because I want that guy killing for us and just doing a great job. So I love that you saw the capacity of
Mhm.
of both of those guys because they really sort of light the light on what could be happening if we want to believe the good side of things.
Well, it's back to what I said. So intelligence is one thing and agency is quite another. So there's
Mm,
some high intellect operatives in the current administration, but they're also given agency to do what they need to do. Scott Bessent recently had an interview with the All In podcast. It's his second time on there. Speaking of
hmm.
the, state of affairs, I think it aired last Friday. Excellent. Just a really tight summary of where we are, where we're going, and all the growth that's happening. And he was able to refute some misconceptions, and I
Mm,
highly recommend it. Again, primary source from the horse's mouth talking about
yeah,
it. But anybody who's empowered to do the job that they are wholly qualified to do and intelligent and mindful, I think great things can come from that. Back to your original question of Secretary of State,
yeah,
the
yeah,
intelligence, the agency, and being empowered to do the job and maybe have some mitigation against the headwinds and the systematic pressures. You really
yeah.
can do some great things. So I'm glad to see some of these shackles being lifted from people who just want to do a good job.
And I'll say this too: we all want some kind of reform, but it was 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 2 years ago, 2 days ago. But reform's uncomfortable, and so some of this I'll call it miscomfort. It's like you don't really know the comfort of that thing yet.
Mhm.
But if we get half of the things right that this administration says we're going to get right, we'll be in a pretty good spot. Better than we have been. 'Cause I don't know that we've been all that successful. We've kind of just been fighting one another. But it seems like for right now, there are bright days ahead. Hopefully, less conflict. Hopefully, getting involved in less conflict. Hopefully, more money in our pockets. That all seems like a reasonable possibility. It could all go south. It can always go south, but it seems like right now, like we're going in a good direction. I think.
So I think you make a good point that being able to manage discomfort and ambiguity. So I gave a lecture once about this environment. Like, are you somebody that can operate in with a high level of ambiguity or volatility? And a question was raised like, what do you mean ambiguity? And I was like, you're not someone that can operate in ambiguity. You've
That's
answered the
right.
question.
Yes,
If
exactly.
you need me to define ambiguity, it means you are not comfortable with it. So
Yeah.
we already know your answer. This is strictly binary. You're a no.
Hmm.
I'm going to put you over here. And you are someone that needs a lot of clarity, a lot of information, and um, there, answered, asked and
Yeah.
answered. And I think that's part of what we're seeing in the consumer class is what is our threshold for ambiguity, change, and um, evolution.
Yeah.
This can be very discomforting to people,
Yeah.
and
And
we hope and want, and optimism prevails, like this is going to turn out good, and then there's that human risk sort of analysis, like, is this a poison berry, am I going to
mhm.
die, like that's just biological.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We're
And
just
there's certainly
we're
people
scanning
that
for the tiger, the saber tooth tiger.
And there's certainly people that aren't thriving at the moment, and are feeling legitimate fear and danger, because that's always going to be the case. There's no perfect forward. Pardon. Anything in closing before you wrap us up? And thanks again for coming on. It's always a delight to talk to you. And make sure everybody, you go check out. Let me put the website back up here. There it is. Down below. I'm going to cough again. So anything you want to get into before we wrap it up?
No, I think there's a lot going on in the world. Zelensky's coming to Mar-a-Lago on Sunday, I think, which is really my area. I'm hoping for good things out of the 20-point peace plan. As always, my number one concern is human beings, human thriving, and peace in the world, if you will. And again, so hopeful and optimistic. And I think that's the one thing I would leave your audience with is I'm the ultimate optimist and think there's a human solution for most every single problem. And I think we should be untethered to put forward good solutions, not Microsoft Office, not the socks and all these other ticky-tacky things, but the big macro solutions of strength and sovereignty. So those are my closing statements. Excited for 2026, even though I think there's going to be ambiguity and volatility, just like always, but hopefully with good outcomes.
The sooner we can get this Ukraine-Russia war over, the better. And Ukraine is desperate to be a powerhouse manufacturer for us. They want to be partnered. And so, there's a lot of potential ahead. We just got to get this damn war over and have it stop killing people, because it's not just the men and the warriors that are dying on the battlefield. It's all the people left behind. How many women are going to get abused and brutalized by just all of this stuff? So the sooner we get all this over with, the better, and then we can all move on. But thanks again for coming on. Let's not be so long in between shows. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I shouldn't cut you off.
Nope, you didn't. So thank you. I hope you have a happy new year, and we'll meet again.
Yes, we will. Everybody, go check out Amber's work at the link below, and I will talk to you all soon. I'll say goodbye to you in a second, Amber. Everybody else, I'll see you in a couple minutes. I've got Brian coming up to talk baseball.